everybody. I hope that we're live streaming. We should be live streaming. Rosalind, this is new for you, for me. We're gonna be trying this out, but welcome everyone. I'm Amy Orlove. I'm so happy to be here with you on this looking outside. Well, it's like kind of a rainyish day in Philadelphia, but so once again, I'm Amy Orlove. I'm with Forte. If you don't know Forte, we're a nonprofit alliance of companies and universities all committed to seeing more women leading in business. And one of those women is my guest, my friend, and a frequent collaborator, Dr. Rosalind Chow from Carnegie Mellon Tepper School of Business. Now, Rosalind, you're a professor, you're a scholar, you're a soon to be published author, which is what we're talking about today. Can you tell everyone a little bit about your background?
Sure. I grew up in California. So one of my other identities is I'm a Californian. I have lived in Pittsburgh for about 17 years now. The joke in Pittsburgh is that you can't be a Pittsburgher unless you're born here. So I will never be a Pittsburgher.
Do you say yin? Do you say yin?
Oh, it should be Yins. Yin.
Yins, yins. That's what, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
I don't say Yins, but I do say slippy now instead of
Oh,
slippery.
interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, well, tell us more about your background. Sorry, I didn't mean to go down the
No,
Pittsburgh
that's fine.
dialect. Yeah.
Okay. So yes, I grew up in California, went to college in New York at Columbia University, got my BA in psychology. And then I went to Stanford Graduate School of Business for my PhD in organizational behavior. And then I got a job, as most academics do, as a professor here at Carnegie Mellon and have been here ever since.
Love that. Love that. Well, I have been asking you for several years now, when are you publishing a book? When are you publishing a book? The reason I love your topic of networking and mentorship and sponsorship so much is, well, one, because I really like your approach to it, but two, last year, Forte surveyed our professional audience, and we asked them what supports they believed they needed to advance their career. And among the top three answers were mentorship and sponsorship. But as we dug deeper into the survey, we learned everyone had a slightly different idea of what mentorship and sponsorship meant. So I'm going to start out by asking you, um, what are mentors? What are sponsors? How are they different?
Yeah, okay. I like to use an example that I start the book with as a way to illustrate that difference,
Yeah.
because I think it's a really important difference that I hope everybody learns about. That's my goal for the book, by the way, is that everybody after reading it will understand that sponsorship means something different than just like sports sponsorships or immigration sponsorships or Alcoholic Anonymous sponsorships. Um, those are clearly sponsorship, but there's also this other form of sponsorship that actually all of us probably receive, and we just don't know how to talk about it. Excuse me. I opened the book with the story of Kim Ang. She, for those of you who don't follow baseball, which also, by the way, includes me, um, actually had to do a crash course in baseball operational structures when I was doing research for this book. So Kim Ang, she is, or was the first female general manager of a Major League Baseball team. She was the GM for the Miami Marlins. And the thing to know about Kim Ang is like not only that she's the first and to this point only woman who's been a GM, she was
Right.
also the second Asian American to be a GM. Um, but she was probably qualified to be a GM for like, depending on who you ask, somewhere between 10 to 15 years before she actually got the job. And it wasn't so then it's also this question of like, well, what made it possible for her to get that position? And it's because she had a really important sponsor in her corner, and that would be Derek Jeter. So if you haven't heard of Derek Jeter,
I've heard of him.
one of baseball's greats, right? Very famous Yankee player, basically, like was the captain of the Yankees when they had their whole dynasty in the kind of the mid 2007 to like 2010 era.
Yeah.
Um, so he actually, after he retired from baseball, wanted to become an owner, ended up buying part ownership into the Miami Marlins. When they ended up needing a new general manager, immediately thought of Kim Ang because they had worked together when he was at the Yankees. She was an assistant GM with the Yankees at that time as well. And the way that he puts it is like he says, I didn't call anyone else. She's the only one I called because she's the only one I wanted, right?
That. Love
And
that.
so I think the reason why I like that story is because there is no mistaking that Derek Jeter sponsored Kim Ang. He didn't mentor her. She didn't need any mentorship. She was great already. I mean, if you talk to people who looked at her after she got the GM appointment, the general consensus was just, this person has been ready for so long. What on earth took so long? Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not that she needed extra coaching or to like demonstrate she had some other skills. She was exceptionally qualified. Some people actually say she's the most qualified GM candidate they had ever seen. But yes, she did not need mentorship. So this is a long-winded way of going back to your question, Amy.
Yeah.
That mentorship is when a mentor takes a mentee under their wing, shares feedback with them, coaches them, basically tries to get the mentee to become someone maybe that they haven't grown into their full potential yet,
Yeah.
right? But sponsors are people who actually already see their proteges as being exceptional, and they just need everybody else to see them that way. So sponsorship is
Love that.
a situation where the sponsor actually is working on some external audience, not the person they're trying to support. So that's the key difference.
That I love that differential because it reminds me of early in my career. I was working at a business school and I was working in the finance department, but I wanted a job in the graduate division. I never knew the story until years later, but one of the finance professors, apparently, who used to be like a vice dean, called the then vice dean and said, have you looked at Amy Orlov? Like she is the right person for this job. You need to hire her. Again, I didn't even know this story until years later. But it makes me think of, I think I've heard it described as sponsors have access to rooms and situations that you don't have access to.
Yeah.
Have you had sponsors in your career?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think everybody has sponsors to some extent, like whether they know it or not, right? And I
Yeah,
actually think that's a really important distinction to be made because, like, as your story illustrates, you can have a sponsor and you might have no idea.
no
You only
idea.
find out about it after the fact. Um, which is brings us to another point that I like to make in the book, right? Which is that it doesn't actually really behoove us to look for sponsors because we are not in control of whether sponsors want to stand up for us or not. I mean,
Yeah,
that's not to say we can't help make that choice easier for them. So we
right,
can definitely talk about that point. Um, but I think it's more important than that we focus on how do we make choices about who we want to sponsor because as sponsors, the power is actually in our hands in terms of who we're willing to speak up for. Um, but yes, this is all to say I have had sponsors. Some I anticipated, and others I did not find out about until later. And I'm very grateful to them.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. Yeah. As I go back, I think I have had, I think about certain career moves and paths that I took. And I do think there were people, I mean, not to quote your book cover, but to totally quote your book cover, um, people who opened doors for me that I couldn't open. So okay, so we kind of know these sponsors are people that um promote you, they see your greatness and they share that with other people. But what exactly does that mean? What do they do?
Okay, so this is a good one. So I think one thing that helps me actually when I'm thinking about sponsorship is I start thinking about impression management because we essentially engage in some form of this, like all of us, right? We're trying to manage how other people see us. And more often than not, we want people to see us positively. They want us,
Yeah,
we want them to think well of us. We want them to think we're smart, right? That we're competent, that we're friendly and likable, and also that we're trustworthy. Those are kind of the three major things that a lot of impression management behaviors are designed to try and address.
right,
And so you can actually take all of that and convert it over to like, that's what sponsors do for proteges, is they're trying to help their proteges be seen as competent, trustworthy, and likable and warm. And so there's a couple ways you can do this. Okay. And I like to distinguish between whether or not the audience, the person you're sponsoring your protege to,
right,
do they actually already know about the protege or not? Okay, because if they don't, that's great. Now you're creating an impression of them, or you're trying to prevent a negative impression of
right.
them from coming true. That one's a little bit harder. We can
Can
talk
you
about it.
can you give a small example of that? Like I just want to make sure that I understand that. Can you like
Sure. Yeah. So it's so kind of like if you know that there's a project that is just soul sucking in terms of hours, it gets kind of professional benefit to being a part of it,
yeah,
right? And you find out that your protege is going to be offered up for that kind of opportunity, which is not the kind of opportunity you
right,
want them to take. Because you're worried that if they take that opportunity, maybe their work is going to start suffering in other parts of their
right,
job, right? Um, or at the very least, like opportunity costs. This is time and effort that they couldn't be spending working on more visible projects that would get them a lot more career benefits. So
got
as
it.
a sponsor, what you can do is you can essentially kind of provide cover for your protege and be like, actually, like this person is oversubscribed working on things for me. So I don't think that they should be assigned to this opportunity. Like,
I love that. Thank you. That was
great.
very helpful because it's they can help create like a positive they could kind of that almost sounds like they were protecting you in some
Yeah.
ways.
Well,
Is
okay, so protect. So I distinguish between protecting and preventing
okay.
because protecting is when somebody else thinks negatively of your protege already. So if
Oh,
we started off with like, okay, do they know about my protege? Yes or no? If no, I either create a positive impression or I'm preventing a negative impression. But if they're already aware of my protege and have feelings about them already, that's when we get into the other realm of sponsorship, which is confirming. So confirming already existing positive impressions,
right.
or as you, excuse me, put it, protecting them by basically trying to um, protect you from negative criticism from others, right? So you're mitigating, you're minimizing others' negative impressions.
So they're either kind of creating an impression, or they're confirming it, and then they can do that by preventing or protecting. So there's really like four different components. Is that right?
Yeah, I think most people will focus on three. Preventing is just a hard one
Yeah,
because it's like it's the creation of a non-event. You're trying to like make something not happen.
right,
So when it doesn't happen, it's great, but it's hard to point to it as like something you've done, right?
right.
Because nothing happened. So that was a little bit harder. Maybe that's kind of more the academic in me making this point. Creating, confirming, protecting is where I think most sponsors tend to go, with a stronger focus on creating and confirming. Because if you've gotten to the point where your protege needs to be protected, it generally means you haven't done a good enough job on the front, on the first two.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So in my example, when this former vice dean picked up the phone and called over, he was creating an impression.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
Again, I knew this person because I worked with him. I really didn't know he was doing this. Um, so you started to allude to this before, but I want to go a little bit deeper. So I think I've had sponsors now that you say this in my life. I didn't know, but how do you find sponsors? Or I don't know. It seems odd. Like there's these random people out there in the world that are saying good things about you.
Yeah. So, well, most typically, sponsors start off as mentors. So there's someone with whom you work, usually in a supervisory position. They help they usually help you to become a better performer, right? They're supposed to develop you. Um, and because they see your progress over time and
Yeah,
they see evidence of your work, hopefully you've shown yourself to be coachable. That's really important. Um, and then at some point, they gain enough trust in you that they're willing to put their reputation at risk by mentioning your name and basically allowing themselves to be associated, um, or allowing you to be associated with them, right? Because what sponsors are functionally doing is like, well, if you trust me, I trust this other person. I think they're great. And to the extent that you trust my judgment, which I certainly hope you do, right?
right.
I am saying that you should also trust this person who you've never met in this case.
Yeah,
And that's also another area where I think sponsors are different from mentors, is that sponsors can get burned in a way that mentors don't necessarily get burned, right? So when you have mentees who don't end up taking your advice or don't perform as well, like from an external audience perspective, they don't they just think the mentee like doesn't know what they're doing. They
yeah.
don't necessarily think, oh yeah, that person, like their mentor really like did not do a good job. That's usually not the first first place they go. Whereas when you have a sponsor who's like, I think Amy is amazing, and not that this would ever happen, Amy, but like if you ended up not being such a great match for that
Yeah.
opportunity, right? That's where that associate dean would have probably gone back to their friend and been like, I don't, what were,
So I
I,
had that. Actually had that where I I vouched for someone. It was just for project work. It was in a different position. But it was for project work. It wasn't for a full-time hire, but I vouched for someone, and honestly, they didn't deliver. I was surprised, but not only was I surprised, I think it hurt my credibility a little bit at the organization that I
yeah,
worked at.
yeah,
So I guess that is, you're right. I never thought about it that way, but you're putting your own reputation kind of on the line
that's right.
for
Yeah.
for someone, for
So
someone.
there's like, the collateral is more precious. right? Because it's how much other people trust us.
So this is going to be, sorry if this is going to sound like a kind of negative question, but so if there is a risk, what's the upside of sponsoring someone?
Well, right. So, I mean, I guess it's kind of like any
Yeah,
risk, right? With risks come either reward,
right.
right? Like
With a lot of risk comes a lot of
a lot of
reward. And yeah,
reward.
yeah,
Right. Well, because your level of credibility in identifying talent, let's say,
yeah,
is is bolstered to the extent that other people totally missed the clues. Because if everybody already agreed that this person was great, and then you're just like piling on and being like, yeah, they're good, people are going to be like, yeah, okay, like it's because that person is good.
right.
But when you're actually putting someone up for an opportunity where it's like not completely obvious that they would be the right person for that, that actually suggests that you have some sort of screening ability or like, I don't know, sponsors, spidey sense.
Like the ability to really assess talent
Correct.
almost.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. So, so and also the more successful you become as a sponsor, not only are people more likely to come and ask you for your recommendations,
right.
you're also going to have more people who want to work with you in the hopes that maybe you will sponsor them for opportunities. And so there's research that essentially shows that managers who are really good at sponsoring their subordinates so that they essentially get promoted out of their supervisory range,
Right.
um, they actually end up getting better candidates to try and transfer over
Interesting.
to work with them. So they get more candidates in general, and they get higher quality candidates. So it does
Yeah.
come back to you, right? Once you have a reputation as someone who is a sponsor and is a good sponsor, and by good, I don't necessarily mean effective, as in like successful at getting your proteges into all the opportunities, even though that's clearly part of it. But what I also mean is making really great matches that benefit both parties.
Yeah.
Um, what that suggests is like you have a really good understanding of what people's, strengths are, and you also have a really good understanding of what other people's needs are. And so you essentially are like, they understand that you have a really good pulse on what is going on. And so you're the person to know.
So, and apologies because I do have a draft of your book, and I've been meaning to pre-read it and finish it, and I have some passages highlighted, but if there was maybe one or two takeaways that you wanted people to get from your book,
Sure.
what would
So,
they be?
so the first thing that I think is really important for people to know is that anyone can be a sponsor. So one of my hesitations about leading with the whole Kim Eng and Derek Jeter example is like, it's so easy for somebody to come back and just be like, yeah, that's great,
Oh, it
but
was Derek Jeter.
Derek
Yeah.
Jeter, right? Like, who among us is Derek Jeter? Um, and yes, that's true. In the book, I do talk about this difference between power and status and how that impacts sponsoring. But what I really want people to know is that anyone can be a sponsor, even, even kids can be sponsors. They sponsor each other all the time, actually, when they introduce friends to friends.
Oh, I love that.
But also when they come home and they talk about how happy they are at school or what they learned, they're essentially sponsoring their teachers to you, right? Because you have a more positive impression of
Yeah.
your kid's teacher because of things that your kid is saying. And so, because sponsorship is basically like anytime we change how other people see each other, it's your kids sponsoring their teacher. And we
Love
sponsor
that.
people all the time when we say, like, I have a friend and she's so awesome at this. and we're just talking, passing by with another friend, but now that friend knows that we have a friend that's really amazing in like X, Y, and Z ways.
Right.
They're gonna think, oh, this person's really great. Like maybe I should meet them too someday. Like that would be nice.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of ways that we already sponsor people. And so the book is really trying to get us to be more aware of we do this already. Now let's just be more intentional about it,
Right.
and be a little more thoughtful about keeping tabs on like, well, who all are we sponsoring? Um, are there people we could be sponsoring and we just haven't thought to?
We just haven't thought to. That's really interesting. And the reason I got to know you was actually through a cold email, right? And it was because I really enjoyed an article that you had published that was about mentoring and sponsoring across differences. I believe, and I really, and that's exactly your point, right? Is that there are those that really could benefit from others seeing them the way we see them sometimes, and the more you can do, the better, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so I hope your earlier question about like, well, why would you sponsor? Like, aren't there
Yeah,
any benefits? Like, absolutely there are benefits. And so more of us should sponsor because the more we sponsor, the better people like us,
yeah.
right? The more they like us, and then the more they like us, the more they're actually likely to want to sponsor us too. So that's the other side of it is that if you want to find sponsors, you should first be a sponsor.
Love that. Love that. So, Rosalind, one of the reasons that you are chatting with us here today is to help us promote that next week, next Friday on March 7th, we are doing one day early for International Women's Day, but we're doing a free women's conference. And we're addressing all types of topics that are relevant to women leading in business, from allyship to influencing without authority. And I know that you're a keynote speaker. And so I know there's a lot more that's happening in the book that you're going to be talking about next week. But is there any little sneak peek that you want to tease?
Oh, I mean, so obviously, we'll talk more about the difference between sponsorship and mentorship.
Yeah,
I will do a deeper dive into this question of why everyone can be a sponsor and actually how why being a sponsor is the best way to get sponsors.
yeah.
So I will be talking more about those things for sure.
Okay, and I'll be there taking notes. And then I also want to share with our audience that one of the things that you've agreed to do, not only did you agree to keynote, but because your book is in pre-sale right now, for those that are going to be purchasing it, I think it's ahead of time or even up until the week that it comes out, which is that first week in April.
Mhm.
um, you're going to be doing a special workshop for us in the month of May, like a deep dive, a 2 hour workshop. And I've actually participated in quite a few of your workshops and the deep dive, and it really was very illuminating. So I'm going to encourage people today, but I'm also going to encourage people next week to pre-order the book because it's going to be amazing. It's going to be
Please
amazing.
do. We will definitely be talking about things that my hope will help you rethink the way that you approach networking. So that's the other kind of angle to the book is yes, sponsorship is different from mentorship, but also when you go into networking, thinking about that the goal of networking is actually to find opportunities to sponsor others can really change that entire experience. And so I'm excited to talk more about that too.
Yeah, and we hear from women all the time that they don't like networking, they don't like networking. And I've heard you talk about networking enough that I think the women that have heard you talk about it have a completely different impression of what networking is or should be or can be. So, well, thank you so much for your time, Roslyn. I think we're out of time, but I really I'm looking forward to next week. I'm looking forward to the workshop in May, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. I'm also looking forward to all of those things. And
Great.
thank you so much, Amy, for being such a great sponsor.
Thanks. Everybody, so nice. Thanks for joining us. So nice to have you here.